spent a decade taking a bite out of conspiracy theories, unraveling urban legends, and grappling with worldwide top-secret issues.
I've even racked up some of their awards.
Wow, I mean, first of all, what a question.
Journalism is about telling the truth, all while ferreting out the bottom line.
I'm a Harrison Hellraiser.
Uh-oh. With me, Cary Harrison, as your guide. And it is the top of the hour. Cary Harrison with you, your new best friend. Welcome, L.A. and beyond. I want to continue from last week's new segment of the Cary Harrison Files, where I share with you some of my history, in as much as we've spent so many years together. And it's just been sort of an outgoing data feed, news signal, not much as far as intimacy. And I come from a talk radio and a rock and roll background where a lot of it was sort of personal. So I just want to share that side with you because the emails I get from you are very personal. And, you know, I don't want to just be like stiff and respond and thank you so much for your lovely email. No. Thank you for listening. Have a pleasant day. Not fair. So I'm just going to continue to be transparent here and give you some of the goods. You can check out at caryharrison.com, CaryHarrison.com. Check out my Substack stuff. I publish a lot of these stories, plus the Germany-style stories you're not likely to hear anywhere else. Doing a deep dig, having been news director in the past, CBS, other places, still have access to all kinds of interesting stories that they choose not to put out publicly. This is why we have this radio station, because we choose to put this stuff out publicly. If you want to get updates on certain stories, you can simply go to caryharrison.com or the caryharrisonfiles.com, the caryharrisonfiles.com, which is on Substack. Last week, I was telling you about when I was in college, a friend of mine who was a mass comm major. I was not. I was an English major. Why was I in English? Who wants to be an English major? Unless you're going to teach English, which I have never taught English. But being the just rounder and booze bag that I was at the time, thinking that college was about flip-flops and having a good time and being a rake, being an English major, and my father was an English major. He was a Yaley, and his father before him also, and his father before him, all the way back to Eli Yale in the 1700s. But my grandfather, at least, was Phi Beta Kappa at Yale and spoke Greek fluently and could have been a great Greek professor, but came from a Quaker background and ended up going to Chicago, my great-grandparents, after the Great Chicago Fire in the late 1800s, and started the first ever public housing project in the U.S., in Chicago, now called the Chicago Housing Authority, and built all kinds of places for people to live after the fire. And it was a giant project, and then later became a commercial real estate company. Go figure. But, you know, nothing to be ashamed of there. Bringing a city back, but doing it as Quakers, which meant everyone shares, and it's cool. So I come from I like to think, good folks, at least, there. Before the Quakerism, back in the eastern shore of Maryland, 1645, Mayflower on my mother's side, 1620. In Maryland, in 1645, there was a law, a state law. It wasn't a state yet, but remember, those of us here before the Revolutionary War were subjects of the king. There was no such thing as being an American. You were an Englishman. And the king demanded, if you had any land, and people did, they came over on behalf of the crown, they had to have slaves. Could not opt out. Why? Because the king wanted high productivity. He's the owner, you're the worker bee, and he wants people to do the extra labor and not have to pay for them. So this crap that the British had nothing to do with slavery, they were the slavery. There were no Americans. Sure, after the Revolutionary War, we kept it cooking for another 60 years, 60 some odd years, 70 years officially, and then it went bye-bye. And we're still dealing with the afterglow, and we still haven't made it right completely. but we're all working on it. At least you listening to this station, you're on that side of the historical equation. So I was telling you last week about in college, my friend, a very good friend, mass comm major, decided, this is in the late 1980s. Oh my God, some of you weren't even born yet. Beautiful. There was a Michael Jackson video, sort of an MTV type thing called Thriller. And it was probably the most famous at the time, before Madonna started sticking gas pump nozzles up her you-know-what, and everything else became MTV as we used to know it. It is no longer that today, but it had quite a long run. Thriller was the centerpiece of everything. So my friend decided to make a satire for HBO called Killer. And instead of it being Thriller, Michael Jackson, breakdancing, beautiful music, all choreographed. I forget, was it John Landis or someone directed it? I mean, it was done pure Hollywood style. This was done not so Hollywood style and on 16 millimeter film. Maybe the original was on 16 millimeter too. I have no idea. But this was 16 millimeter, which is about 4% better than 8 millimeter. But I mean, we had professional lights, we had cherry pickers, we had all of these abandoned buildings in the old part of Tampa Bay, Florida, which is called Ybor City, spelled Y-B-O-R, and it's named after someone. And that part of the city looks like New Orleans. If you've ever been to Mardi Gras or Southern Decadence, not Mardi Gras, but 20 times more vile, you know, New Orleans, cobblestone streets, gas lamps, balconies on the second floor, this kind of thing. That's what Ybor City looks like. Tampa, also known as Cigar City, was literally that. The tobacco was grown in Havana, Cuba, brought over on boats every single day, and 160,000 cigars were hand-rolled in the United States and sent around the world. So yes, a Havana cigar, the tobacco comes from Havana. It's probably not rolled there. Unless you go there today, good luck. You can get a cigar rolled in Havana and then bring it back, but it's just a handful of cigars that the limited amount of people still know how to do. And so there was a factory type mentality, giant buildings of the day, 1800s, so big brick ones with tall windows, factories, the windows open to allow air. When electricity came into play, maybe in the 1920s, and there were ceiling fans, but rows and rows and buildings of mostly women and many men rolling cigars to give to the people of Earth, all grown in Havana. So a lot of these buildings have been abandoned for years because what are you going to turn them into? Except now they're condos and movie theaters and whatever. But at the time when we were making this satire of Michael Jackson's Thriller called Killer, they were abandoned and you could just basically drive down the street, climb up on the roof and shoot a movie. City didn't really know about permits because city didn't really hang out in that part of the neighborhood, and therefore it was all done invisibly and beautifully, and it would have cost a fortune and been impossible to organize otherwise. So we had hired a bunch of different break dancers because that was the gist of Thriller at the time. It was awesome break dancing, moon dancing by Michael Jackson. All of them dressed up as mummies and this and that, same kind of theme. And our Michael Jackson lookalike, who actually looked a lot alike and fit the same costume and was really a ringer. And we spent a fortune. When I say we, I don't mean me. I mean my friend Lee spent a fortune, literally everything he had, and then maxed out his credit cards. And 2 reels after they're shot. So those of you listening who are in the movie business or media, television, whatever, if you shoot 2 reels of anything, reel would be equivalent to, if anyone remembers back when you shot on tape for TV, beta tape, or even going back to U-matic 3/4 inch. If you shot a whole tape, which held about an hour, and that tape got lost, everything on that tape could have cost $60,000, $100,000, $1 million. The tape is just the end part of the raw footage, but there's all the lighting, there's the actors, there's all the pre-production, post-production, the production itself, all of it caught on tape or film. So the value of a film would be the dollar value in the tin, but after it's been shot, it's actually the dollar value of everything that went into shooting it. It is just the captured image of all the expense, all the people that showed up, the RVs, the makeup, all of it, the sets, the lighting, and there it is. 2 of those reels of film got stolen. And we know who stole them, the manager of our fake Michael Jackson. So you don't have to be in Hollywood to have a Hollywood ending. And a Hollywood ending is not going off into the sunset necessarily. It's usually being burnt by the sun until you personally set. And that's the end. So this guy, Harv Cavattini, the manager, had misplaced the reels. They were just gone, period. We knew he had them, and he was holding hostage some crazy amount of money to pay his fake Michael Jackson because he knew this was going to be funny and clever and pithy. It was going to be on HBO. It was going to make a lot of money. He wanted more. And he was one of those guys who would screw a cigar into his face. I mean, he really played up the 1960s producer of Hollywood. And it was not there. It was in Ybor City. But, you know, I guess it's optics. If it looks real enough, you're going to believe he's real enough. So that's kind of the backstory of why we did what we did. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Show on KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles. Don't forget, you can get copies of this simply by going to caryharrison.com. You can also get my Substack, where you're going to get a lot of different articles and research of news stories like the one coming up, where we're going to take a look at today's arrest of the first American ever and put into a German prison for going on to a U.S. military base in the country of Germany. I want you to imagine a German military base in the country of the United States and German nukes in the United States in a German military base. Never going to happen. Never, ever, ever, ever. Anybody's military base here with their nukes, never, ever going to happen. But because we have the largest amount of military bases around Earth, having them in Germany since World War II, and they're not official, but this guy has made them official. He found out there's 81 giant mega thermonuclear weapons sitting in these domes, and he stood on top, and well, now he's in the slammer. We're going to talk about what that means. You can get those kind of stories on my Substack, Cary Harrison Files. Back to what we're talking about. So here we are shooting this Michael Jackson satire called Killer, based on his Thriller from the 1980s for HBO. It's going to go big. Really, it was very well done, except that the film is missing. Therefore, there is no film. Therefore, I don't care how good it is. It ain't nothing. It's zero. But the film had gone missing. We were hoping to track it down, and I think Lee was going to put up whatever, his, shoes to try to get these things back. This is the part, the overlap with me, because I had never made a movie before. I don't claim to be a movie maker, although I've been in, 6 probably movies, way more documentaries, being interviewed in the documentaries, from everything from how Congress refuses to read bills before they sign them to whatever, including PTSD, my own. That's a different story for a different time with the parents I was raised with. My mother, a cross between Mommy Dearest and Cruella de Vil on a good day, like a Tuesday, and my father collecting his war memorabilia, if you catch my drift, wink, wink, and I'm not German. We'll just leave it at that. Twisted stuff there. So making a movie is a brand new thing. It's really no different from making a radio show. You just don't have to deal with the pictures. Although I am streaming video as we speak. You won't be able to see it until after the show when it gets posted on caryharrison.com and probably on our KPFK archive site on my page there, assuming somebody can post it there. I don't have the personal access yet, but if I did or do, I will put it on there immediately, and then you'll be able to visually see what this whole show looks like. And it has closed captions, which makes it really easy to see and read, especially if you're on Facebook, on your phone, on your mobile phone, in a train, a bus, whatever. It's kind of easy to absorb that way without playing audio to a large group. So you can expect to see that on there a little bit later. My overlap with this movie. You get the idea what we made. You knew it was going to be a success. We all did. So much so that the manager of the Michael Jackson lookalike decides to steal the film and hold it hostage. So we had traded out. This is the we as in the I. I had traded out a $140,000 RV. So think about the value of a $140,000 RV in 1980s. 140 grand. Today, you can get a very nice RV for 140. In the 80s, woo, microwave oven. Everyone had a microwave then, but not in an RV. It had some kind of special shower. It had all the bells and whistles. It had double generators, TVs in it. I mean, it was a souped up. Got it from a local RV dealership who wanted credit in the movie. You know, RV supplied by blah, 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 RV thing. And Florida, as you know, has no state taxes. The reason they have no state taxes is because the tourist industry is what pays for the roads, pays for people's otherwise tax debt to the state if there were no tourism. And the tourism abounds on steroids. I mean, it is a flowing river of cash. And we can thank Walt Disney for that, by the way, back in the 50s and 60s, who realized when he could go to Orlando, which was nothing more than orange groves, much like West Hollywood once upon a time was nothing more than orange groves, much like much of the valley, orange groves. And he went there and he said, look, we've had this giant success with Disneyland in Anaheim, and I want to build Disney World, which is like 5 times the size, at least. And they said, here, make it so that our orange groves become a cash cow, like we have a big international airport, hotels, tourists come in and they can go from here to NASA, known as Cape Canaveral at the time, later Cape Kennedy. Then they can go to Miami, or they can go over to Tampa Bay. They can go down to the Keys, whatever. But Orlando will become something which it's not other than an orange grove. So they give Disney sovereignty. This has never been done before. Disney World is the size of 2 cities, mid-sized cities. They have, or let's say had, I'm putting that parenthetically because it was Governor Ron DeSantis who has temporarily taken away their sovereignty. But they basically own their own economy, their ecology, the cops. They could execute you probably there. They're like the Vatican. They have real sovereignty. And in return, there would be millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars flowing into Florida, money that would not have been there before, that would have paid for all the infrastructure and made a lot of people rich. So a fair trade. So that's why RV dealerships and others would be willing to barter for a credit, because people watching HBO all over the United States, everyone had HBO back then, because what was out there and available? HBO. I think there was the movie channel some people had. Did Showtime even exist? I don't think so yet. It really was HBO and maybe a couple of others, Cinemax or Skinemax, it was as it was called then. So if it gets seen on HBO, that means somebody's going to probably come and buy an RV. That's the hope. That was the trade. So $140,000 RV in 1980s money, souped up. We used it as the dressing room. And of course, half of the dancers and break dancers, and I'm in my very early 20s, so are the break dancers too. None of us have real jobs. None of us are anything yet. So you just assume that they all have a place to live and a place to go. Oh, no. Oh, no. They not only are in a movie, but they now have an RV to live in, some of them anyway. And there was a giant bed in the stateroom in the back, which was nothing more than a vile brothel. So I had written a story for the newspaper about this, and I'm just going to go from that. And I think it will explain the situation very well. The RV, which I dubbed the Jupiter 2 after the ill-flying Lost in Space saucer, began to stink after the second week of shooting. Although it was a cold night, Florida's unshielded daytime sun provided the perfect greenhouse effect inside the Jupiter. After all, what is an RV but a gigantic aluminum beer can on 4 rubber tires? Each of the 30 break dancers had need to use that gigantic aluminum beer can on 4 rubber tires. The ship's head had, they had to use the ship's head, because it is a ship after all, like the Jupiter 2, several times a session, and the 60-gallon onboard septic tank was filling fast. The entire portside electrical wiring had shorted out from operating high-voltage lamps so far over spec that all the interior paneling fried in a quick smoky puff. But where was one supposed to rest this 10-ton monster at the end of its cumulative abuse? At Denny's, of course. And they had it towed for $150 each time. 3 times, to be exact. The Sun Dome, which is part of the University of South Florida's athletic, it's a Sun Dome. It's where football happens. So the Sun Dome at USF proved to be a favored parking for young filmmakers like us. Another week of blazing sun beat down. And how hot does the sun get? Well, close your eyes. Imagine you're in Palm Springs in August. Yeah, that hot. That blazing sun is beating down, simmering and stewing the Jupiter 2 and its 60 gallons of excreta, where people are using it multiple times a day. It has never been emptied. So the whole thing is full. It is the reason we have methane gas problems warming the world. And I'm sure this particular moment did a whole lot to add on to everything. By now, the pooge tanks were so puckered with methane madness that the interior of the RV had ripened with the most hideous fragrance. The smelly beast had sat at USF because, frankly, we were too afraid to return it to its generous owner. All the grommets had been ripped off the walls, the custom-made drapes all stolen, bedspreads, sheets, stereo system, shower curtain, seat cushions, and sink faucets had all gone missing. Walk in, oops, they've gone missing. Yeah, and the fridge, located on the same side as the burnt-out wiring, was full of gelatinous orbs of budding flesh, which was once hamburger. The pungency and feculence was overwhelming. We had no choice but to hurl several pounds of ripening mad cow into the Sun Dome's parking lot. Surely nature would dispatch some sort of buzzard to draw nourishment off the offending foodstuffs. The promised return of the Jupiter 2 had passed by 1 week now. Yep, the RV dealer wanted it back. We only had it for a short period of time. We are now 1 week overdue. The dealership had reported the thing missing or stolen since they hadn't heard a peep from us. That peep would have revealed that the thing had been fully trashed. Naturally, we were too frightened to return any of their pages. People used pagers back then. The vehicle's exterior dents and scratches alone would have put the Jode family to shame. Bill Steinbeck reference. It was clear that things, unlike wine, would not improve with time. So the only course of action was to drain the brute of its ballast and tidy it to the best of our ability. It was the only course of action. But where could one go to do this? Well, it seemed to me that Busch Gardens, think of Magic Mountain, think of any theme park. There's one right next door called Busch Gardens. Maybe you've been to it. A lot of roller coasters, alligators, bears, giraffes, train rides. That Busch Gardens. Well, it seems that they had some sort of travel park or something. I remember having read about it. And surely they would have the appropriate facilities. So off we went. Off lumbering down 30th Street in a former Cena cruiser turned sewage tanker. Upon arrival, we sought out an open slip where we could dock the Jupiter and do the nasty. First with tank number 1, the befouled drinking and shower water supply. And a tourist from Michigan with a sunburnt belly laid flabbily in his lawn chair and gawped at us. Clearly, we looked confused, guilty, and perhaps ill. I asked the fellow if he'd be so kind as to show us how to hook up the evil-looking industrial drainage hose, which laid coiled next to our vehicle. Not wanting to waste time explaining the obvious to us two bumpkins, he took charge and attempted to clamp the hose's nozzle under the lip of the Jupiter's outgoing waste valve. For some reason, it would not lock into place as the manufacturer had intended. His frustration was great, and a withered bicep trembled as he tried to screw the clamp into place with fierce, twisted lunges. Finally, resigned to the fact that one of the parts was irreparably bent, he decided to drain the RV anyway, with the assumption that much of the stagnant water would flow directly into the hose because of its near fit onto the target. Makes sense. So he gave the release handle a good pull. Something akin to the texture and clarity of any polluted river anywhere in the USA at its downtown-most exit issued from the Jupiter 2 in multiple sideways gushers, each stream changing color every few seconds. The man recoiled in horror, then staggered backwards in utter disbelief. He must have wondered how two humans, such as the two that stood before him, could have single-handedly done this to their own water supply. These were the kind of people he'd been warned about in the AAA bulletins. One of the last trickles ran their course. Lee casually asked him how he might do the same with the dreaded number 2 tank, as in that number 2. Now the guy pointed toward a lakeside picnic area and said we'd find the community cesspool that-a-way. It, pointing to our blessed mothership, could be drained directly without need of hose owing to our broken fixture. And then spluttered something about ruining his day. Yeah, for sure. And week and probably 10 years. So we took his advice and motored around the lake looking for the cesspool. This cesspool, he said, was there, and it's easy access. But where was it? Why had they made it so hard to find? It was my idea that this alleged cesspool was actually a duck-laden body of water with the pretty fountain we'd been driving alongside for the past 10 minutes in circles trying to find this cesspool. After all, it had even a paved ramp sloping right down into the water. So therefore, this must be it, the one with the ducks and the fountain. And the paved ramp would offer easy access because we could back the Jupiter down nice and snug between the two picnic tables, which buttressed it on either side. But which of us was going to back this giant almost into the water? And shouldn't the other one then have to pull the drain valve's ripcord? Seems fair, of course. Lee offered to navigate the albatross if I'd yank the handle. Seemed like I got the short end of the straw, but time was running out, and campers dining at other picnic tables were beginning to stare for some odd reason. I nodded, and he began to slowly back the sagging Jupiter down the narrow ramp. The back end and tailpipe became submerged into a foot of water, causing streaming bubbles to dance on top of the buried exhaust pipe. Our mobile movie studio, dressing room, production office, and cat house, we didn't get into what was actually going on there and why the sheets were torn up and half the mattress was stabbed. But that lakeside barbecue, the grills, the meal tents, all surrounding the Jupiter 2, these campers continued to point from their perches while they were eating their meals at those picnic tables. Odd how many uncivilized visitors would choose to expose food and family around a cesspool, I thought. Think of the germs, especially the ones that we would introduce from the entire cast and crew of Killer. And all those stupid ducks, they'd surely get sick. Well, it was time. I approached the monstrous valve with an unglad heart, knowing full well that the earlier experience with the water tank was certainly to have been the nicer of the two tasks. Just one tug should do it. I wondered if all those hideous eruptive noises coming from inside the head were caused by methane gas escaping in borborygmic, that's a great word, I can no longer pronounce it, borborygmic burps. That would mean a hell of a lot of gas pressure if it were true. No time to ponder the vagaries of physics. Best just to pull the valve. So Lee and I gathered round as I grappled the glistening red handle. Immediately, the horror of horrors, the unimaginable occurred. Never since the dawn of humankind has there been a more ghastly moment in nature. A thundering nightmare of pudding exploding from the side of a recreational vehicle turned evil menace. a lucis naturae, a new and improved advanced formula Typhoid Mary wannabe. A moment so overwhelmingly, shockingly egregious in its magnitude that no words in the English language could even describe this grotesquerie. Each second bringing with it a blurping volume of angry mud, shooting 6 feet straight out, right over the ramp and down into a little flower bed. Lee and I scrambled to the front end of the vehicle, freshets of sweat beating down our faces. My stomach had responded to the pounding geyser of effluvia by kicking into gag reflex, a sort of sudden reverse peristaltic surge that matched the power and might of the La Brea tar pits now being formed at our feet. It was certainly time to get the hell out of there. Besides, the campers were on their feet by now, yelling something and waving their arms with clenched fists. An odd slick had begun to form near the decorative fountain, and the ducks were darting in peculiar patterns. We will pause there for today. Those are the Cary Harrison files. You can get more simply by going to CaryHarrisonFiles.com or CaryHarrison.com to see the video of this, of me reading that anyway, telling you that story.